Oops.
Okay, everyone, we are live on YouTube.
Hello, everyone. It is 5:30 p.m. and we're going to go ahead and we are going to start with tonight's Zoning Advisory Committee meeting. It's Thursday, October 15th, 2020. And for item 1.01, I would like to call everything to order and move to 1.02, roll call with our Vice Chair, Kaylin Campbell.
All right, we're going to start with Natalie Gaiselis, Trustee Zone A. She'll be unable to join us today. We have Polly Boardman, Trustee Zone B representative.
Here.
We have Malia Pacta, who's Trustee Zone C representative.
Present.
Beth Smith, Trustee Zone D representative.
Present.
Araceli Martinez, Trustee Zone E representative, is unable to join us today. Christine Hull, Trustee Zone F representative.
Present.
Christy Essa, Trustee Zone G representative.
Present.
Adriana Publico, at-large member.
Here.
Keelan Campbell, at-large member, present. Kathleen Coombs, at-large member, who's unable to join us today. Amy Howe, school administrator.
Present.
Dallas Holsley, certified teacher counselor.
Present.
And Christine Swanson, educational support staff. We have a quorum.
And I don't think Christine is with us, so we'll note that for the record. Great, thank you so much. Now we'll move on to item 1.03, public comment. And this is an important aspect of today's conversation and potential recommendations. We would like everyone to know that's watching that we are very much open to your real-time comment now and at any point during the presentation. Everyone is welcome to send their messages to zoning@washoschools.net. Again, that is zoning@washoschools.net. We will be receiving your comment in real time as we're having this discussion and taking pauses to read everything that comes through. And so all of that comment is absolutely welcome. And we encourage members of the public and the families in these communities to reach out to us during today's meeting. So on that note, Kendall, do we have any public comment for this opening public comment?
Not for opening public comment, no.
Okay. Seeing no comment, we will move on to item 1.04, the action to adopt tonight's agenda. Are there any comments or discussion on this item? Hearing and seeing no action on that, I would entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
Polly Boardman, I move to adopt the agenda.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Kaylin Campbell.
Keelan Campbell, I second that motion.
Is there any discussion on the topic? Seeing no discussion, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor, aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. All right, now we're going to move on to section 2, the presentation, discussion, and possible action regarding possible attendance zone changes stemming from the construction of a new elementary school in the Cold Springs area that could impact Desert Heights Elementary School, Lemon Valley Elementary School, Silver Lake Elementary School, Stead Elementary School, Cold Springs Middle School, and William O'Brien Middle School. This is an item for possible action. So for members of the public, that means that a recommendation could possibly come out of today's presentation and discussion. And we would like to welcome Adam Searcy, Chief Facilities Officer for the district. But before Adam gets going, we wanted to take a brief moment to kind of recalibrate this committee and the community on this particular topic. This is something that has been an active topic for the Zoning Advisory Committee and with the district. with the building of the new Michael Inskeep Elementary School and the effects of that. So many members of the community will know that we did discuss this over the course of several months in our previous committee year. And we did have a recommendation that came out of the March meeting and was brought to the board. However, as we did present to the board over the course of the summer, there were some additional options that came out based on their feedback, and the Board of Trustees, wanting to respect the process of returning to the communities and the Zoning Advisory Committee, asked for this topic to come back to our committee so that we could review these additional options that the community and our committee had never seen at that point. And so that is our goal tonight, to revisit this topic and to discuss it and potentially have a recommendation based on this new information. Lauren Ford, Area Superintendent, did you want to add anything on this? I know that there's also been some changes in this area related to the district and leadership.
Yes, in this area, we have several new principals. One of them is on our Zoom call. Daniel Kirk is joining us. He's the new principal at Lemon Valley Elementary School. But we do have new principals at the locations that we are considering tonight over the past year and last year as well.
Beth, you're on mute.
Thanks, sorry about that. Adam, is it possible to have you close that panel that's over on the right so that we can see the presentation as large as possible? Perfect, thank you so much.
Okay, all set? Okay, well, I'll take it away. Thank you for the flashback, Beth. For the record, my name is Adam Searcy. I am over the facilities department at the school district and work with a team of planners and a variety of operations staff to try to put together these analyses. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of background information as well. I'm going to jump to slide 3 first, and then we'll come back to this one. Hopefully many of you have these documents in front of you already as well. But, you know, just for some of the newer members, or maybe somebody who's watching this who hasn't watched our meetings before or been to our meetings before, these maps we often create to kind of depict the existing or proposed zoning boundaries. The blue lines represent the existing elementary school boundaries, and the colors, the orange and the pink in this slide, represent the existing middle school boundaries. And then, of course, you can see all of the existing schools themselves. And you'll also note a potential future new school. We've talked about this in the past. This is a school site that WCSD owns at this time and is definitely a part of our 10-year building plans, growth dependent. So this is a part of the solution into the later 2020s. Up here, just, you know, so you have your bearings, like this is Cold Springs area, and you've got Gomes, Cold Springs Middle School, and then the new Michael Inskeep Elementary School scheduled to open August 2021 is up here. This blue boundary that is on this slide is the boundary that the committee last year decided upon, presented to the school board, and was actually approved. So this is the boundary between these two elementary schools now. And what we're going to get into really pertains mostly to Silver Lake Elementary. So we'll flip back to slide 2 and see really these are the existing and projected enrollment numbers based on essentially the current conditions. Now, I wanted to kind of just give an overarching statement that these are the same numbers basically that we saw in March. Because of all of the impacts, irregular impacts associated with COVID, we've seen a variety of hopefully temporary enrollment fluctuations across the district. So in a normal zoning meeting, we're actually quite precise with our data. And that's something that's very important to us. Obviously, going into the future, projections become less and less precise. But for the purpose of this meeting and for this conversation, I'm going to ask you all to appreciate the irregular data that we have right now. And we felt that it would be more appropriate to use the pre-COVID data, knowing a couple of things or assuming a couple of things. That number one, the impacts of COVID are hopefully temporary in nature. And number two, that the land development and population growth has not seen a noted decline. So while school enrollment numbers are doing some unusual things right now, we do see tremendous growth. And for the purpose of this conversation, are asking everyone to assume that the projections will remain essentially on the same trajectory that they were anticipated to prior to COVID. Okay, so all that said, again, a little intro for folks new to these tables. We've got the individual schools in the rows. The capacities are calculated really as a function of the number of classrooms in each building. Many of these schools, if you've been in a variety of schools, they're not the same. The style of the school at Silver Lake is not the same as the style of the building at Stead or Lemon Valley. It is a similar style between Silver Lake and Desert Heights, but if you're intimately familiar with Desert Heights, they actually have upwards of 6 or 8 additional more classrooms than Silver Lake does. It's just a newer school. It's a different model of the same prototype. So anyway, it's really just a straightforward calculation of number of rooms times number of kids in the rooms, essentially. Then we've got these temporary portable classrooms. Most of you are familiar with those. The important takeaway with regards to those numbers is that they're not counted in the overall capacity or the percentage calculation, right? So we have the base capacity. We oftentimes add temporary portable capacity, but because those portable classrooms don't expand the spaces associated with cafeterias and playgrounds and parking lots and music rooms and things like that, we feel it's unfair to present that Silver Lake Elementary School really does have a capacity of 631 students just because we put 2 portables on their campus. So while those classrooms are very much there and very much in use, when you see these percentages, obviously 544 divided by 531 should equal 102%. We're not counting those portable classrooms in that calculation. Another important element of this particular graphic are these vertical lines. At the start of the 2021-2022 school year, this vertical purple line is intended to represent the opening of Michael Inskeep Elementary School and the probable impacts associated with any decisions you guys might make tonight. Any adjustments to the zoning boundaries you guys make tonight will potentially, subject to board approval, go into effect in the 2021-2022 school year. So you'll see in all the graphics, you'll see changes, from one year to the next. The vertical line here at 2022-2023 represents the opening of the new O'Brien Middle School, anticipated for August 2022. That also is going to have impacts on enrollment levels at certain schools as we move 6th graders up into middle schools and whatnot. So really, those are just sort of the orientation types of information on where we are today. These numbers, these are the current numbers, if you will, representing the movement of 5th graders back down into elementary school. Just to backtrack a little bit, right? We've got currently Nancy Gomes as the most overcrowded elementary school in the district. That's why we're building Michael Inskeep. It's so overcrowded that the 5th graders and the 6th graders from Gomes and Silver Lake are both up in Cold Springs Middle School today. At the start of next school year, we will be bringing those fifth graders back down into elementary school. That's why you see this change. Tremendous repopulation of Silver Lake with the fifth graders coming back down. And really, this is the obvious area of concern that we're primarily focused on here this evening. What are we going to do about this situation? Okay, and just for good measure, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Could I just take a quick pause? This is Kaylin Campbell for the record to acknowledge that area superintendent Jen Van Tress is with us and that Silver Lake principal Courtney Seago is with us as well.
Thanks for that. Thanks for joining, ladies. Whoops. All right. I wanted to round it out with a mention of this table at the bottom. I think it'll be more effective for us to focus on really the relativity of moving these kids to here is going to make this type of an adjustment rather than focusing on the precision of the data, unfortunately. But inevitably, we're all curious what's really happening. And so we have some last year enrollment numbers at each of these schools, the projected enrollment numbers, which is what you see up here. And then you see the actual enrollment numbers, which again are uniquely out of sync with what we would have expected. Here's the differences, and then a sentence about, the largest takeaway associated with that. We've seen this trend district-wide. We've talked about it publicly before. The majority of the decrease in enrollment we're seeing are at the pre-K and kindergarten levels for a variety of reasons. But again, that is not slowing the home building applications up there. And it is hopeful and likely that these trends will reverse and that growth will resume. So for the purposes of these discussions, these numbers are up here basically pre-COVID, and assuming that these students will return and that these growth trends will basically resume on the same trajectory they were anticipated to go on before. Okay. All right. Thanks for bearing with me on that. We'll skip forward. A little more orientation here. You guys have seen this before. We refreshed it with some updated student data on slide 4 here for these areas, but slide 4 and slide 5 really sort of just orient you to the primary areas that we are going to be discussing to try to help solve this puzzle or relieve the overcrowding at Silver Lake Elementary School. So we'll refer to them as we go about this evening. Rancho Haven, Silver Knolls, Antelope Valley. This, if you're not familiar with that area, it's a very rural, expansive area. They're all within the Silver Lake area or Silver Lake Elementary School zone. So this is Silver Lake Elementary School down here. Silver Lake itself, this is Red Rock Road going all the way up here, all the way to 395 California. This is Antelope Valley up through Lemon Valley and over. But you can see these white boundaries. The Silver Lake Elementary School boundary encompasses this entire area, comes all the way down to Silver Lake. So you can see the areas, see the students in each area. We're going to be talking about these areas in one form or fashion throughout the night. And then, as I said, slide 5 also zooms us in on another area or potential neighborhood that we're going to be talking about. So south of Silver Lake, this is Silver Lake Boulevard right here and US 395 right here. You can see Silver Lake Elementary School. Again, the colors represent middle school boundaries and whatnot. So you've got the actual student numbers within these areas. If we looked at an aerial image, you would see these areas, this area here are a couple of apartment complexes, and these areas are single family residential complexes. And we're going to talk about these areas throughout the night as well. So again, really just an orientation on the areas that we looked at in many different combinations to try to best resolve the overcrowding at Silver Lake. Slide 6 alludes to what Beth described at the onset here, we spent extensive amount of time over multiple zoning committee meetings last spring discussing many different options, combinations of options, variations of similar options. At the end of the day, you can really see back on slide 5, that neighborhood right around Silver Lake Elementary School, there's very few logical areas that we could remove or rezone students from. So we're limited in the amount of adjustments that we really could make, but we tried almost all of them. And then we tried a few more for good measure. So those are really just a recap. What we're going to talk about tonight was our best efforts to review them, rethink them, kind of distill them down only into 4 discrete options. I will encourage you to ask about what about this, what about that. Chances are we've considered it, and likely, we will be able to kind of logically step through what the impacts of that scenario would be. More students in this school, less students in that school. But I think the decision tonight might rest more on other factors and the group's discussion rather than the data that we'll present.
Adam, on that note, may I pause really quick and remind the public that's watching this portion of the presentation that we still actively are looking for your public comment in real time, and everyone is welcome to send that to zoning@washoschools.net. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Beth. So starting off on slide 8 here, we have what we're just reterming option A. This is the recommendation from last spring that the committee reached agreement on. And you can see in this scenario, we have the same boundary for the Red Rock Road, Antelope Valley, Silver Knolls, and Rancho Haven areas would all remain zoned for Silver Lake Elementary School and Cold Springs Middle. But what this option does is it takes all of the residences south of Silver Lake Road, between Silver Lake Road and the highway, and rezones them into Stead Elementary. And then this recommendation also is indicating that if they're going to Stead, then they would matriculate into O'Brien Middle School rather than currently they go to Cold Springs Middle School. Okay. So again, this is what the board made a recommendation, or pardon me, the committee to the board last year, and were asked to revisit. This slide 9 are the projected enrollment impacts associated with that change. The table on the top are the existing conditions for these same schools. So really just an excerpt from what we saw on slide 2. And then the table on the bottom are the impacts associated with this actual change. So you can see an increase in the numbers of students at Stead Elementary associated with that pocket of students moving over there. Silver Lake goes up to 122% here with the 5th graders coming back, but then they're relieved by having those students moved over to Stead. You see a similar effect between O'Brien and Cold Springs, right? We're essentially moving students out of Cold Springs Middle into O'Brien Middle School. Okay, any questions on this one? And then again, you see these colored vertical lines to try to indicate some of those overarching actions anticipated at those school years. So these are carryovers from last year. Try to sometimes summarize some benefits and drawbacks. It can get to be a bit much with all of the data to tease out simply some of the pros and cons. One thing I wanted to point out on this one, you actually saw a public comment earlier today, I believe, around the busing. This bullet, in fact, we have found is in error, that this option, the students south of Silver Lake Road are actually currently provided transportation to Silver Lake because of the nature of Silver Lake Road itself. Doesn't have a safe crossing or route to school. So those kids are bused already. and would continue to be bused if they are rezoned to Stead Elementary. So this final bullet requires an additional bus on option A is actually inaccurate. This option would be essentially neutral with respect to transportation, school district transportation. But otherwise, these are kind of subjective, but our effort to try and distill this down or summarize it for the group. All right, I'll just continue through these unless you want to pause. We can come back to them later and do the discussion. Option B, like it says at the top, same as option A, but also considering the movement of Antelope Valley over here in rezone into Lemon Valley. And then of course, again, if we're going to Lemon Valley, we're matriculating to middle school at O'Brien rather than Cold Springs. No change in this option to the Silver Knolls or Rancho Haven areas off of Red Rock Road. They all still remain zoned for Silver Lake. So on slide 12, again, you see the data impacts of these options. Similar numbers for Stead. Silver Lake enrollment goes down slightly in comparison to A because of the additional Antelope Valley students moving out of Silver Lake Elementary into Lemon Valley Elementary. No impacts technically to Desert Heights in this scenario. I should also mention on this one, you see Lemon Valley climbing in enrollment as the years go out. I mentioned at the onset, we do own an elementary school near the Lemon Valley zone, and definitely have that in our capital improvement plan within the next 10 years to build, and would ultimately not see these enrollment levels likely at Lemon Valley would be relieved before that time. So just wanted to emphasize that if this is a cause for concern. But again, same as option A, just with the addition of Antelope Valley to Lemon Valley here.
Adam, really quick, Beth Smith for the record, just to re-clarify, since we're looking at the tables now, can you just break down those 100 students that will be, I guess, rejoining Stead Elementary? So that's the advent of those zoning changes, but then the new middle school opens and then the number drops the next year.
Can you say that again?
So we see that Stead potentially acquires the new students going into the school year beginning in 2021, but then we have that green line and then it goes back down to the 94%.
Yeah, so I mean, the changes on Stead Elementary here between 2020, 21 and 21, 22, this is representative of the rezone change. So you've got all the kids south of Silver Lake moving over into Stead Elementary. This green line represents the 6th graders from Stead Elementary being elevated up into O'Brien Middle School once it's reopened with a larger capacity.
Thank you.
Sure, thanks for pointing that out. We talk about that often, but just to reiterate for some of the new members, there are decisions like that, a variety of programming decisions and things like that that are really made at the principal and the area superintendent level and the superintendent level, sort of administrative adjustments in how we staff and structure our schools. Our objective, our standard really is to have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in our middle schools. That's part of why we're actually moving forward with this project at O'Brien to rebuild it and expand it. And in 2022, we'll have that new facility and be able to bring up the 6th graders in all of the feeder elementaries up to O'Brien.
Adam, can I ask you a question? This is Amy Howe. Lemon Valley after the green line, their enrollment does not go down. Do they already?
Gold Star, absolutely, great catch. So O'Brien has 4 feeder elementaries: Stead, Desert Heights, Lemon Valley, and Alice Smith. Currently, Lemon Valley sixth graders actually attend middle school at O'Brien. The other three, Desert Heights, Stead, and Alice Smiths, all have their sixth graders still in the elementary. So that's why you don't see a change in 22, 23 to Lemon Valley's numbers. Good catch. Okay, anything else on this one? Again, just some highlights there. This one does potentially have an impact from a school district transportation standpoint. But some other pros and cons really here that we just wanted to try and summarize. Moving on, option C. So this one leaves the area between Silver Lake and 395 alone, leaves them in Silver Lake Elementary School and Cold Springs Middle, but considers rezoning both of the rural areas to Desert Heights, essentially. We tried to highlight this. It's difficult if you're not familiar with the terrain out there. There's really not a paved roadway connection between these valleys or even between Silver Knolls and Stead. So to highlight that, we emphasize these routes. This is the shortest paved route.
Adam, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Christy Essa. Can you please reshare your screen? For some reason it deleted and I can't see what you're presenting. Can you, is there any way to refresh it? Thank you.
How's that?
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. So anyway, you can see the yellow line that would show the route, the shortest paved route that the buses or parents would have to travel to get to Desert Heights. Same with the blue line coming from Antelope Valley. This is the shortest paved route to get from Antelope Valley to Desert Heights Elementary School. Okay, and on slide 15, you see the projected impact data there. So reducing the enrollment at Silver Lake, increasing the enrollment at Desert Heights is really the primary changes there. Again, of course, you're essentially moving kids from Cold Springs Middle to O'Brien. So there's a little bit of an impact there moving in that direction. Desert Heights, however, you can see in the existing condition has some capacity to offer up. And so we really wanted to look at this option or present this option where all of the movement goes to Desert Heights. This one too does have some transportation impacts. It kind of changes the logistics out there because it is such a long route. It's, you know, in our more compact neighborhoods, they can really swing around the block and take care of a lot of students. But these large dispersed valleys really need to be almost, it's hard to serve them collectively. They kind of have to serve them individually. So there is an impact there. But again, another option or variation that we really wanted you guys to take a look at. And finally, option D, pardon me, there's an option E as well, but option D is the same as option C, as it says, just with the Silver Knolls and Rancho Haven area still going to Desert Heights, but the Antelope Valley area instead going to Lemon Valley Elementary School rather than over to Desert Heights. Now this measures out to be about a mile and a half closer from, you know, here or the end of this blue line to Lemon Valley versus the end of this blue line to Desert Heights. So they're comparable, but also just an option that we wanted to show you without rezoning any of the students in this pocket near Silver Lake. Option D, impact data, very similar or identical actually to Silver Lake Elementary, same impacts to Cold Springs and O'Brien. You do see an increase to the enrollment levels at Lemon Valley Elementary School as a result of this change, and a slightly lesser increase to Desert Heights as the Antelope Valley students are now going to Lemon Valley in this option. Okay. fairly similar impacts, pros and cons here, somewhat subjective. You know, if Antelope Valley makes more sense to send them to Lemon Valley Elementary versus Desert Heights. And then the final option for that in this presentation is option E, we called it. So this one is actually similar to option C in the sense that both of these rural areas off of Red Rock Road and Antelope Valley are going to Desert Heights, rather than option D where Antelope Valley was going to Lemon Valley, but still really the same impact as far as both of these areas being rezoned out of Silver Lake Elementary School. And then in option E, we added in just the apartments here south of Silver Lake. So we, as we described back on slide 5 or so, there's really kind of two distinct neighborhoods in this sliver between Silver Lake Road and the highway. You've got the single family residential and the apartments. For the purposes of this presentation, we only selected the apartments to move over into Stead and O'Brien. And here, finally, you have the impact data associated with that. So slightly greater enrollment decline or decrease to Silver Lake, because not only are we taking the rurals and rezoning them out of Silver Lake, but we're also taking the apartments as well. So you see a slight uptick at Stead Elementary as a result of that, but not as significant as options A and B. And then you see kind of a similar impact to Desert Heights as we saw in option C. No impact to Lemon Valley Elementary School in this particular scenario. And then, like I said, kind of a similar impact to Cold Springs and O'Brien. In this one, you do see O'Brien start to creep up a little bit more than we've seen before, because this scenario, we're taking the most amount of students out of Silver Lake and into various elementary schools, all of which move from Cold Springs Middle into O'Brien. Again, not sure that it's, you know, a material amount, a difference maker in the conversation. But that's kind of the summary on these options. These would have some similar pros and cons. They're all cousins of one another, right? I think you guys can see that. I'm sure your minds are spinning on half a dozen little hybrids of what if we did this and this minus that. And we can walk through all of those and have, but really to try to just put the major options out there for consideration. If the group wants to discuss them, we can go down any rabbit hole you wish, or come up and discuss a potential hybrid. But that's all the content that we have here prepared, and open it up to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Beth Smith, for the record, want to reiterate to everyone watching right now in the community that your comments are still being received in real time and read by the group. So for anyone that has questions or would like to share some thoughts, please email zoning@washoeschools.net. And with that said, I have a question about transportation. So we have received quite a bit of public comment, not just for this month, but also in previous months, about the impact of transportation with parents for before and after school, and then other programming that parents may attend. I know it's a rough number, okay? So I'm not holding anybody to an exact second, but roughly for options C and D, what is that added time for those families in those areas going past Silver Lake and up to Desert Heights? Like, did transportation give us any sort of range or target for additional transportation time?
So the feedback from our school district transportation department didn't focus so much on, drive time. I mean, I don't have that answer for you. I presume it's a matter of a handful of minutes. It's probably less than 1 mile to just continue along Moya Boulevard up there to Desert Heights. It's essentially negligible when you're driving 10 miles or 20 miles in from Rancho Haven. The problem really is in their ability sort of to combine routes and create efficiencies where they sync up their pickups and drop offs. And honestly, I don't have that committed to memory. I don't deeply understand it, but I did get a detailed email response from them that basically indicated that both options C and D would require an additional route, an additional bus to be incorporated into their overall programming up there. That doesn't necessarily mean they would need to add an additional bus physically to their fleet, but it likely would have an impact to the general fund from a staffing standpoint, or really just some manner of inefficiency when they're having to, send a single bus all the way up there just to pick up however many kids and take them to a different school, rather than the way they're able to do it slightly more efficiently the way it's structured currently. So C, D, and B, they said would require an additional route, potentially 2, depending on a few different variables. They weren't entirely sure, but A, they said would be neutral from their standpoint.
Thank you very
Christy,
much.
Christy, yes, I just had a quick question. I'm looking at the map for students in option D and in option C. And if you follow the yellow line, as you're saying, that will be transporting them down Red Rock, I'm wondering why are you not able to cut over on American Flat Road and go down Lemon Valley Road? Is that not an option?
Correct. They're not actually paved roads. This map, I apologize for not having something that either has an aerial image or does not depict these unpaved roads, but these highlighted roads on these two maps are the shortest paved route that our school buses could travel. Certainly parents, they're improved roads. There's a GID out there, and you can drive on those roads. They're not exactly like Jeep logging roads or something, but school bus is going to take these blue routes.
Thank you.
This is also Beth Smith for the record. Something that I want to point out for the community and also for the members from a historical view with the Zoning Advisory Committee is that when we had touched on that bump at Stead, where they go up based on those students to the 107%, and then they go back down once the new middle school is open. We have encountered that a few times in the past with our committee, that based on new builds, that sometimes communities are impacted in a short period of time because the construction just does not line up in that way. But we have made recommendations in the past that, again, do acknowledge that for a year or a period of time, it'll be a unique challenge as long as we recognize that there's a resolution immediately after. And that has happened with other recommendations in the past. So just in case anyone is wondering what it feels like or the thought behind potentially having a year with this type of a challenge, as long as we know that the resolution is immediately after, we have made recommendations for that. So questions. Does anyone have any questions to clarify what we've seen, or questions that you have before we really begin our conversation in earnest and also go to public comment?
Malia Pukta for the record. I've kind of been doing a lot of homework on this subject over the last couple of days, and I went back and I listened to the February and March minutes, and then I also watched the YouTube videos of the May and June Board of Trustees meetings where these were talked about. And one of the things that really stood out to me in watching those and also looking at all this information is the underutilization of Desert Heights. It just seems like it's just so under capacity. There's so much room there. And I wonder why the Antelope Valley students couldn't go to Desert Heights, which looks like it would, in the 10-year plan, benefit Lemon Valley's enrollment numbers. and then keep the kids from those other two, what was it, Silver Knolls and Rancho Haven at Silver Lake, and then move that section, the south of Silver Lake Road, to Stead.
Polly Boardman for the record. I agree with you, Maria, that Desert Heights is underutilized. And I think that's why like E is intriguing to me in that it makes all the schools not hit the orange zone right away, you know? So I guess if it's not too much longer to get the kids from up in Rancho Haven down to Desert Heights, then it seems like a pretty good option. And then you don't have Silver Lake overcrowded again really soon.
And I just wanted to highlight, Malia, this is Adam again for the record. If we look at option B, I think Bravo sounds a lot like what you were describing, with the only difference being these Antelope Valley students would instead be rezoned to Desert Heights, which, as I said, is nearly equidistant. It's about 1 mile further to get to Desert Heights than it is to get to Lemon Valley, and then consider the students south of Silver Lake being rezoned to Stead, like what you described. So again, for the purposes of discussion, we're coming up with, well, what about this? You know, just playing this out, you would see Lemon Valley remain unchanged in that scenario rather than increasing in enrollment slightly. Desert Heights increasing in enrollment slightly rather than remaining unchanged as it is in option B here. And then the rest of these numbers would be the same. So certainly a viable option.
Mhm. Thanks, Malia.
I'm curious, since we have Jen Van Tress and Dan Kirk on the line, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I was wondering if there's any feedback from especially Lemon Valley or Desert Heights on these options. I don't know if it's too early for that. Maybe this part comes later, but.
Dan Kirk, principal of Lemon Valley for the record. The only feedback that I have received in my short time at Lemon Valley has been just concerns around the impacts to Military Road, I believe is the road, and none of these scenarios impact that. So I assured that parent that that family that wouldn't have an impact to them. And so that's the only feedback and information that I've received from the community at this time.
Beth Smith for the record, just staying on that topic, I think maybe not in the immediate history, but there is actually a precedent that Antelope Valley used to go to Lemon Valley Elementary School, right? Before they were rezoned over to Silver Lake at some point. I see heads nodding. Is that a yes? Okay.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah, Adriana, for the record, Jason Shipman, who was on our committee last year, had previously worked at Lemon Valley. I believe he actually attended Lemon Valley when he was a student and told us that last year.
And when I previously worked there at Lemon Valley, I believe they also did attend then as well. But we were very much over capacity when 6th grade was there, and I believe Antelope Valley did attend there, or parts of it at least.
So Jen Van Tress for the record, we did meet with all of the potentially affected principals right before fall break and went through each one of the scenarios. Every principal, it was very cute. They're like, bring them up. We'll take them. Who's coming? They were all extremely excited about the opportunity to have students join their schools, including Desert Heights. David Friedman, who's the new principal there, said, I will welcome anyone who walks through our front door. We are very excited about everything going on at Desert Heights. And so he is very open to working with families and the community to meet any and all needs out there as Dan Kirk is, and Courtney also being on the Zoom call as well. So at Jackie Maloney at Stead also was very open to having the students south of Silver Lake join her community also. So they were very open to whatever this committee would recommend.
Thank you very much. Lauren Ford, was there anything you wanted to add on top of that while we're on the topic of any feedback that the district has?
Nope, not at this time. That was all.
Thank you. Any other clarifying questions? I'm looking for hands here.
For the record, I just wanted to get or make a comment, I guess, about the options that move the apartments over to Stead Elementary School. Adam, is that option A and E or just option E? I went back to try to look at the maps, but with Zoom on here too, it makes them really small. That move the apartments over to Stead Elementary?
Yeah, so option E, Echo, moves only the apartments over to Stead. And then option B and A all move the apartments and the houses south of Silver Lake. So here we go. Can you guys see my cursor? This entire area in option A and B moves over to Stead. Option E is the only one where only the apartments move over to Stead.
Thank you, Adam, for clarifying. My only concern with moving families who live in apartments, is sometimes we have a lot of more single families homes who live in apartment buildings. And so I do have a little bit of an equity concern moving students who live in apartments further away to a different middle school. It just could cause them to, parents not to be able to attend certain after school activities or things like that. So I just wanted to kind of plant that seed in everyone's mind as we think about moving the students who do live in the apartment buildings south of that street over to Stead Elementary School.
And a public vote for the record, I think it moves them from Cold Springs Middle to O'Brien STEM Academy, which is actually much closer geographically to where they live. So if I were a parent, I think it's a benefit, but I'm not. So I'm not going to pretend to vote for them. But
are they closer to Stead Elementary than they are to Silver Lake Elementary?
I think that's about equidistant. But when we talk about going to middle school, and this change would change their matriculation from Cold Springs, way up in Cold Springs, right, over to O'Brien, which is right next to Stead Elementary School and much closer to those apartments and those houses than Cold Springs Middle is.
Gotcha.
And Beth Smith, for the record, I definitely hear the equity comment, Kaylin, and I appreciate that while we're on the topic. But before we quite get to that in public comment, from the equity side of things, I am most hesitant about only moving the apartments rather than all the apartments and the single families. So when I look at these options, and I do look at this through a lens of equity, E is the one that gives me the most pause. I see the logic in moving the whole area, but just calling out the apartments is a little bit more difficult for me. So I hear what you're saying. It translates a little different for me, but it's the calling out exclusively of the apartments that I have the harder time with. But your point is definitely well taken, and I appreciate and feel the same equity concerns as well too. Do we have any other questions before we pause and go to the official public comment that we've received so far?
Yes, sorry, Christine Holt for the record. Adam, I know that you don't have exact dates of when building new schools will happen, but there is a school in the 10-year plan that would alleviate the Lemon Valley overcrowding. I heard you say that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's likely going to come in the form of that highlighted site kind of in between Stead and Lemon Valley Drive here. Where's it good? depiction of that. Right over here.
Okay.
This is heavily under construction with new
Right.
home. And Lemon Valley, as you saw, is also rapidly growing and forecasted to exceed capacity even with their sixth graders up. So this school site is highly likely to be constructed within the 10-year horizon, probably within like a 7-year horizon.
Okay. So the projections in looking when they go over into that orange, when they go over the 100%, it's not entirely accurate because there is an additional school in the plans. We just don't have a date, so we can't know for sure, right?
Yeah, it's too uncertain. I mean, we own this school site currently, so that's why we go this far to even identify it. There's other growth in the area. There's a 1,500 unit subdivision off of Red Rock Road that's in the planning stages. There's a 1,000 unit subdivision on the south side of 395 that's in the planning stages. Of course, Stonegate is under development. We're in conversations with all of those developers. We have formal agreements with the Stonegate developers for multiple school sites, but that's for the purposes of this meeting and the time scale that we're really concerned with. That's just talk. You know, we plan out 20 years, but in the 5 to 10 year horizon, this development in Lemon Valley is happening before our eyes, and this is our medium term solution for that.
Okay, thank you so much, Adam.
Is there anyone else on the committee that has any clarifying questions before we take our official pause for public comment, which, by the way, there is still time to do for those who are watching. We have seen that there has some comment has come through, and you're still more than welcome to email zoning@washoeschools.net.
I do have one question, Beth.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Amy Howe. So there was under benefits, like in option A, I think it might be mentioned in a couple of other ones too, and it talks about maintains current route for families who use before or after school care. Can you just maybe clarify what you're referring to? Is that talking about before and after school at the before and after care at the school site?
Yes, that was a carry-on from the last committee year, and it does take into account the families that are coming from the rural areas, that they're going to the same schools that they were before for the before and after school care at these school sites.
Okay, thank you. No, traffic is an issue out there, so I'm thinking about like families that are driving out to Cold Springs and back to the schools, and I don't know how that all works.
It is. It's a very good point, and that came up quite a bit with the public comment in the previous committee year, and then it's also come up in this committee year too. Although it's a balancing game overall. It's really a matter of balancing equity and accessibility and the challenge of zoning. But the point is very, very well taken, and it's something that we've been very sensitive to, and it was a key driver with the original recommendation. Again, recognizing that our rural families are traveling so far to come down to whichever school they'll be attending. Are there any other oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Adam, this is Christine Holt for the record. I have one additional question. So in looking at maybe a hybrid option, and I know you look at all the options. I know your office does. So was there an option for the Silver Knolls areas and the rurals coming in for option, like I'm looking at option B, instead of that yellow line just stopping at Silver Lake Elementary and continuing on to Desert Heights as in all the other options, and then the Antelope Valley still continuing to go to Lemon Valley, and then that whole area south of Silver Lake going to Stead. Was that looked at all?
Yeah, I'm fairly certain last year that was looked at. I mean, what you just described would look a little bit most like E.
It would be, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry, Adam, I should have clarified. So it would be E, except adding that neighborhood with
Yep.
the apartments, because we talked about that whole like section should, that whole piece below Silver Lake could move all together to Stead.
Yep.
So it would be like the move from Silver Lake to Stead would be from option B, but then it would be the three more rural areas would be the E option, I think.
Yep. And so what you just described, I mean, it looks kind of like E, except for the blue line goes to Lemon Valley Elementary School, and the yellow line stays the same. And then this area, the entire area south of Silver Lake, similar to A and B, goes over to Stead. And so, likely we looked at that specifically last year, but what that would do also numerically was that's essentially the maximum enrollment relief that we could provide to Silver Lake. I mean, it's all of these areas are coming out of Silver Lake and going to different places, whether in this option, they're both going to Desert Heights, or you bring Antelope Valley down to Lemon Valley, same impact on Silver Lake. And here you're taking all of the students south of Silver Lake and bringing them over to Stead, like option A. So we kind of know what Stead's going to look like in that scenario. We know what Desert Heights and Lemon Valley are going to look like in that scenario from kind of piecing these other options together. And then you can look at Silver Lake and, without trying to do the math on the fly or whatever here, know that it would be considerably, in fact, because there's quite a few students in that additional single family area. I wanted to say like 75, so it would be nicely still further reduced enrollment levels in the scenario you're describing.
And Christine, I like where you're going. I know that we're kind of phasing into a little bit more of the deliberation part before we get to the public comment.
Yes.
But I want to point out that I like where you're going with that. And to Adam's point, we have all of the data. We don't need to make a recommendation exactly on one of these letter options perfectly. We have all of the data in front of us. And so as we talk this through, if we say we like this from here, we like that from that, our recommendation does not need to be based on one of these preset options. We can create our own option. We have all of the data in front of us, and we can make a recommendation based on a custom option that the committee agrees to.
I guess I would just expand a little bit on what I said previously. While what we just described provides the maximum amount of enrollment relief to Silver Lake Elementary School, it does shift all of those students then over into O'Brien, away from Cold Springs. And we actually explored some intentional split feeder options basically last year, where we did stuff sort of like this, but then recognizing the imbalance between O'Brien and Cold Springs, we sent some of those kids back to Cold Springs at middle rather than having them matriculate with their elementary school colleagues into O'Brien. So there was not a ideal solution, but I just wanted to point that out, that the maximum enrollment relief to Silver Lake in that scenario puts O'Brien maybe in a little bit more populated scenario than we'd prefer. And that's out there a little ways. And there's some, different options that we could consider in the future to solve that problem. I mean, that's the nature of rezoning. It's very dynamic, at least over the course of like a 5-year period oftentimes. So just wanted to point that out, that shift is not only at elementary, but also middle.
Does this at all, I'm sorry, Christy asked it, does this at all affect high school?
No, it does not. All of these students are currently zoned for North Valleys High School.
But thank you for Christine for pointing out and bringing it to our attention that we don't have to color within the lines. We can create our own recommendation based on the data that we have. So any other clarifying questions before we pause and we review the public comment and acknowledge the public comment that's come through? All right, seeing no clarifying questions at this point, Kendall, can we please acknowledge the public comment that we've received so far?
Yes, we have public comment from Stacy Hansen, Jennifer Dunkley, Tamara Binford, Jamie Thompson, Cecilia Mansfield, Rainy Day, Jeff Lewis, Area Superintendent Jen Van Tress on behalf of the North Valley principals, Cynthia Pegtel, and Eric Mansfield.
Thank you. So committee members, do you have access to that community comment? Would you like to take a minute to read that?
That would be great. Thank you, Beth.
Absolutely. So to members of the public, we're going to take a moment. We're going to fully read these comments and make sure that that is factored into our deliberation discussion, which we'll pick up with now. Committee members, if you would prefer to turn off your video while you read those messages, feel free to do that, and then please turn your video back on. I'd prefer if we could do this in 3 to 4 minutes, if not less.
Is this what it's like when you administer a test at school, Teacher Ford?
Yes, it is.
All right, once everyone's done, I'll ask for everybody to put their cameras back on so we know that we are ready to continue. So the committee very much appreciates everyone who sent along their comments beforehand and also during the meeting. Thank you very much. It really helps. Okay, team. So let's start talking through what we like, what we don't like, and hone down to either a custom option or one of these here. I'll share, I said this before, but now we're into the deliberation portion of it. I'm hesitant about only moving the apartment families as opposed to that whole area. So that's something that I'm less inclined to do personally for equity reasons, which Kaylin also brought up. So that's something that is really jumping out at me about signaling out that one subsection of that community. And the other thing that is really present for me is this one's really tough for the communities that are watching, but we really have to properly relieve Silver Lake Elementary School. I understand that no one wants to leave their school and that change is very difficult, and I respect how difficult that is. But seeing Silver Lake currently at that 102% and then bringing them up to such higher levels and then sustaining them over the 100% feels to me like we have some other options that could bring some relief to that school. Although I recognize and respect it would be a difficult change for some communities. But those are my two things that are most present for me right now. What are some other thoughts?
Beth, this is Kaylin Campbell for the record. I would also agree that overcrowding is probably one of the biggest problems we have to look at here. As a teacher, myself, a classroom teacher for the past 6 years, having too many students in the classroom has been the #1 hardship that I've had going year to year. And so I think that's got to be the biggest thing in my mind that we're considering, is relieving those classrooms of being overcrowded.
Alice Holsey for the record. Actually, Caitlin, I have to chime in with you on this. I'm in complete agreement. I know that certain options add travel time, and parents have to, account for that in the mornings and the afternoons. But the quality of your child's education changes dramatically depending on the enrollment level at that school. I mean, it really makes a difference when, your school is over capacity versus when you're at like 70 to 80%. That's a really good sweet spot. You've got enough teachers to kind of, help out with all the different common areas in the school. We can watch kids better. Behavior outcomes tend to be better. I mean, it makes a huge difference. And the crowding in the classroom, just for teachers, personally, it's really difficult. So
I would also say, especially thinking about students who are in special education on IEPs, or our EL students who English is their second language, they need as much extra support and differentiation as they can get. And when you're overcrowded in the classroom, you're dealing mostly with management and a whole lot less of giving the kids the support they need. And so I think, in my mind, that's got to be our biggest consideration, is getting those classrooms to a manageable size.
Agree.
Malia Pakta for the record. I can't agree more strongly with what you guys are saying. I'm not a teacher, but I am a parent. I'm out in Spanish Springs. So a few years ago, we went through a lot of this. We ended up on a year-round multi-track option, and that was not anything I would wish on anybody, especially if you have kids at different levels, because I was having to pick who's going to go to school and who's going to stay out because we're going to go on family vacation. It was just a mess. So I think that the relief to Silver Lake has got to be our paramount. But I worry. I mean, so the families in the rural areas, there are great benefits to being in a rural area. My husband and I considered rural areas before we decided on our current home. And when you move to a rural area, you're in a rural area. It's going to take you a long time to get places, and that's something that you build into your decision. But that being said, I worry about taking those kids from those two rural areas, especially Rancho Haven and Silver Knolls, and sending them right past Silver Lake to Desert Heights. And I know Desert Heights has the space, and from what I was watching, I believe that I heard Trustee Caudell say that area is kind of already built out. There's not a lot of room for expansion, so there's not going to be an opportunity for the enrollment there to necessarily go up naturally. And it's a shame to underutilize that kind of space. But being that those families are already traveling those great distances, if they're working in South Reno, I commuted from South Reno to Spanish Springs 15 years ago, and it took me 35 minutes. The past couple years, there have been a few times where I've left from like Moana Lakeside area at 5:15 to come to Spanish Springs, and it takes me 40 minutes. that's a 22-minute drive. And it jumped to 40 minutes just because of the traffic. And I've seen 395 at 5:15 going north, and it's a parking lot. So I just worry that moving those families to Desert Heights is going to create a lot of problems for parents who have to do before and after school care or use child care centers or whatever that looks like, because that's an extra 10 or 15 minutes that they're having to add on each way.
I definitely hear you, Malia. Is it that long though for that extra mile and a half? And I don't know. I am familiar with the area. I don't live there. I have driven this, maybe not at peak times, but in that as they drive past Silver Lake and go up to Desert Heights, that mile and a half or so, is that roughly the amount of time that it would add? I know we don't know based on what Adam had shared before, but the point is definitely well taken.
And I don't know if it's 10 or 15 minutes. I just know that when you have more cars on the road going to the same place at the same time, it takes a 22-minute drive and turns it into a 40-minute drive. So
yeah, and what you're touching on now, and Christine, Polly, feel free to jump in here too, was a main driver to, if I'm sure you did, because I know you listened to the meeting in March and then probably also February, that drive time was a big consideration with the original recommendation for A. What I have a hard time with though now that I see other options, which the committee and the public did not see at the time, is that the overcrowding that still exists, in addition to the educational experience. It's the lunchroom, it's the playground, it's all the ways that overcrowding affects us. And that's not to minimize anything. It's just, where is that balance with permanently keeping a school overcrowded? But again, I'm just recognizing the fact that these are all the things that are being weighed.
Christine Hull for the record. So I just want to share out with everyone that I've spent all of my career in education. I'm not currently a classroom teacher, but I've been a classroom teacher for many years. And I'm sure that Amy and Lauren can speak to this, but one of the most important things that our committee, needs to consider as far, if we leave a school overcrowded, it's not just the classroom spaces, it's the hallways, it's the lunchroom. I mean, I've been at schools where we've gotten to the point where we have to have 4 different lunch periods. That is just so much navigating for our principals and our staffs in the buildings. So that's really, really important. And I want to just mention what Beth had mentioned. We did talk about the commuting on 395 and how difficult that is, but the conversation was more about the parents having to go backwards. So one of the options was to have the Silver Knolls and Rancho Haven families actually go further north, and that would have added a ton of time onto their commute. So that was why those options were not considered. And I think kind of why we didn't really talk about the schools that were closer to Cold Springs Middle School in these options, because it added the wrong direction commute time. So all of these options it's on their way was kind of the idea. And I think I'd just really like to acknowledge there's literally no perfect solution here. This is a growing area, like growing a ton. And it's, if we do one option, it overfills a middle school, but then it lessens an elementary school. Like there's no perfect solution, but I think what we have to do is what gives the most relief to our overcrowded schools.
Adriana Publico for the record. I agree with many of you, especially with what Christine just said. In our public comment, there's a lot of support for option A. And my concern is that if we went back to the board with option A, that they would decline it as they did back in May and June. So I almost see it as a non-starter, that option. It doesn't relieve Silver Lake enough. I do like that the houses and the apartments south of Silver Lake Boulevard are kept together. And I think whatever option we pick, whether they stay at Silver Lake or go somewhere else, those neighborhoods should be kept together as the equity piece. And honestly, that's the easiest change to make. If anybody has to move, those guys don't move very far for elementary and get to be way closer to their middle school and not have to go north on 395 to get to Cold Springs Middle, which is once again a growing dynamic area with lots of houses being built. So there's going to be even more traffic to get there, right? And so that's part of why I think that Cold Springs Middle School is going to get more populated. I'm not worried about them being too empty. I'm a little bit worried about O'Brien STEM Academy being too full, because there is no relief valve for that, right? Lemon Valley is going to get another elementary school in their zone, so we're not too worried about overcrowding Lemon Valley. Not that that's one of the options, but yeah, I agree. This is still a toughie, but I don't think we can go back to the board with A. I really don't. I don't think they'll go for it. And then they'll pick something maybe that we don't even have any input on, that the public doesn't get to weigh in on like they do with our meetings, right? Because a lot of the folks who picked option A think that we are the decision makers, and really it's up to the board. We make a recommendation to the board. If we come back with A, I think they'll go with something else. And we're already within 10 months of this action taking place. And that's uncomfortable for us because we like to give families at least a year's worth of notice if things are going to change. So we're already kind of past our own deadline, and I don't want to kick it down the road any farther.
Yeah,
For the
Polly
record-
Boardman.
Sorry, Polly.
I agree with Adriana on that. I think A is sort of a non-starter, and I know that a lot of public comment like it, but that one has a lot of orange. I mean, I know I'm just talking colors, but the Silver Lake just looks not great when we look at these other new options that Adam's prepared for us. I mean, I do agree with your equity comment. I think by looking at A and looking at what Stead has and O'Brien, I think, if I'm correct, that would be what would roll over to say an E or D or whatever, one of those two. I think E, where it would relieve Silver Lake, and then everything south of Silver Lake Boulevard would go to Stead. I think those numbers are combined and we wouldn't be in the orange as much. So I agree with you that we can't really go with A, but could we take a hybrid out of A and use it with one of the others?
Yeah, Lauren, I recognize that you wanted to make a comment, but I was doing some math and I would love for other people to validate my math, but E and adding the single family homes would add 41 students to O'Brien. I was doing the math on that. So we do see the option with the apartment families already in those numbers, and the single family homes would be an additional 41 students that are not represented there. So I just wanted to call that out so that we have a definitive number, like if we were moving towards a hybrid. And Lauren, I see that you had a comment.
So thank you, Beth. For the record, Lauren Ford, Area Superintendent. I just wanted the committee to know that as we're driving out as area superintendents, we do go to these schools, right? We take a path. And I just wanted you to know that when we're headed out to Desert Heights Elementary School, we take Stead Boulevard, which is a 4-lane road, as opposed to going on Rock, which is a 2-lane road.
Malia Pukta again for the record, because I haven't had a chance to get out there and drive this. What is the road that the buses and parents would take to go from Silver Knolls and Rancho Haven to Desert Heights that takes them past Silver Lake? What is that road?
I believe it's Moya Road.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Adam Searcy for the record. I'll do a little ad lib Google Earth here. Moya Boulevard. It's a nice 2-lane road, no traffic.
Okay.
I mean, nothing significant. And then it comes up to Echo, and then you're right there. Here's Desert.
Okay.
So it's boom, boom.
Okay, thank you.
Christine Holt, for the record. So just to clarify what Lauren was just saying, that however, if you were coming from town from Reno and you're taking 395, you would get off on Stead to go straight to Desert Heights rather than the route that we're seeing coming from the north. So if a parent was coming in to pick up from like an after school program, they're not going to take that same route and drive past Silver Lake. They're actually going to take Stead. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct.
Yeah, this is
Okay.
395 North. That's what you were saying, Lauren?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Thank you so much for that, Lauren. That's actually really helpful.
Okay. Yes,
in that thought process for the after school pickup.
No problem.
And Adam, for Desert Heights, just for the purposes of the community that's watching, maybe some of them are new to this process, the numbers that you have in these charts as of right now, minus the uncertainty with COVID, already take into account known neighborhoods that are being built in the areas. That's where we see the increasing enrollment over the course of the years. Can you just clarify that for anyone that's watching?
Yeah, all of our numbers absolutely take into consideration known, planned, and in progress residential development across all these neighborhoods. We take great pains to try to project based on historical information, the student generation rates in individual neighborhoods for different types of housing, apartments versus single family homes, et cetera. So yes, to the best of our ability, those numbers are quite accurate. And then, as I said, COVID has turned everything kind of upside down, but we do know where the growth is being developed currently and anticipate that continuing as it did before COVID.
Thank you. Christy, I want to make sure you have an opportunity as well too. Was there anything that you wanted to share?
I had just looked that it was 2.5 miles from hold on, I just had the 2.5 miles from Silver Lake Elementary School to Desert Heights. It said it was 6 minutes on Google Maps, but again, I don't drive it during peak hours, so I don't know. But otherwise, that was the only thing that I had noticed. And I think your numbers are correct as far as the 44. And when I did the calculations, it brought Desert Heights, not Desert Heights. Let me rephrase that. It brought Stead, I believe it was 88%. So still within, just looking at the colors, was still in the white with option E.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that. I was able to do my quick math, but I much prefer in-depth math that's double checked. So thank you very, very much for actually doing that. It feels, again, jump in here, but it feel like we're congregating around an adjusted version of option E. Is that where we're kind of feeling? If someone feels ready to make a motion, and we can continue to talk if we need to, but if someone feels ready, what I would recommend for that motion is, of course, calling out the actual agenda item that we have now, and assuming that we agree with maintaining the singular connection between Antelope Valley and the other rurals, staying with Desert Heights and not moving over to Lemon. So the way E is structured now, I would recommend that someone make a recommendation for E and also adding the single family residences that are south of Silver Lake Boulevard for clarity on those communities.
I can take a stab at it. Adriana Publico for the record. I recommend for agenda item 2.01 that the Zoning Advisory Committee recommend to the Board of Trustees that the Silver Lake Elementary School rural neighborhoods, Rancho Haven, Silver Knolls, and Antelope Valley be rezoned to Desert Heights Elementary School, and that both the apartments and single-family residences south of Silver Lake Elementary or Silver Lake Boulevard be rezoned to Stead Elementary School. All of those would be also rezoned to O'Brien STEM Academy from Cold Springs Middle School.
Polly
Is there a
Boardman, I second.
Thanks, Polly. Is there any conversation on the motion? No. Seeing no conversation, I will go ahead and we'll move forward with a vote. All those in favor, aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. The motion carries. Thank you very much, committee. Very, very much. We'll go ahead and close out section 2, move on to item 3.01. This is our final and closing public comment. I do believe, Kendall, that we received some comment before we announced the last group, although I did see that come in. Can you announce those public comments?
Yeah, we had public comment from Cecilia Mansfield again, and public comment from Lorraine Toole. That is all.
Thank you very much. All right, so item 3.02, our announcement of our next meeting. This is subject to change, of course. It's currently scheduled for Thursday, November 19th, 2020. We will review our course of action moving forward with the board based on this recommendation, and then move on to item 3.03, which is to adjourn this meeting at 7:01 p.m. And thank you so much to everyone for commenting, everyone for being with us watching this, and thank you very much to the district and the committee members for your contribution with this recommendation. Thank you so much.